Close your eyes for a moment and picture yourself standing on the weathered stones of a medieval bridge. The air is cool and damp. The river below murmurs with ancient secrets, and beneath your feet, you feel the echo of countless footsteps, pilgrims, merchants, soldiers, and kings who crossed here centuries ago. These bridges were not just paths over water. They were the beating hearts of entire civilizations, masterpieces of stone and spirit that carried far more than travelers. They carried power, faith, fear, and dreams. Think about that. The ground you walk on isn't just rock. It's a living archive, a silent witness to wars, treaties, rebellions, and revolutions that shaped the world we know today. Why would a king pour a fortune into building a bridge? Why carve saints and monsters into its arches? Why hide chambers within its pillars or design it to withstand not just floods, but invasions? The answer is as layered as the stones themselves. These structures were declarations of dominance. They were economic engines, military strongholds, spiritual guides, and stages for human drama. They held the hopes of merchants, the prayers of pilgrims, and the cunning of engineers whose brilliance we're only beginning to appreciate. And woven through it all are legends, whispers of ghosts, devils, curses, and treasures buried deep within the foundations. Today, we're going to cross one of these bridges together, not just physically, but through time. We'll uncover 26 astonishing layers of meaning, from the hidden symbols of power carved into the stone to the secret passageways used for escape and espionage. We'll explore how a simple bridge could make or break an economy, change the course of a war, or even offer sanctuary during times of plague. This is a journey into the soul of the medieval world, a chance to understand how these magnificent structures transcended their practical purpose to become enduring icons of human ambition and ingenuity. So take a step forward with me. Let's unravel the mysteries waiting just beneath the surface. Picture the scene. A traveler in the 14th century approaches a bustling river crossing. Before they even set foot on the cobbled surface, their eyes are drawn upward to the towering gatehouse, adorned with the fierce stone lions of the local lord. As they pass through the archway, they walk beneath the stern gaze of a carved saint and the heraldic shields of the ruling family, each symbol meticulously placed to tell a story of unchallengeable authority. This was the reality of crossing a medieval bridge. It was an experience designed to impress, to intimidate, and to remind every single person, from the wealthiest merchant to the poorest pilgrim, exactly who held the power in that land. These structures were far more than feats of engineering. They were the ultimate symbols of control, carved in stone for all to see. Consider the strategic placement of these bridges. They weren't built just anywhere. A king or a powerful baron would commission a bridge at a critical juncture on a major trade route, a place where goods, people, and information naturally converged. By controlling that choke point, they controlled the flow of wealth itself. The bridge became a physical manifestation of their economic power. Everyone who wished to cross had to pay a toll, a tax that directly filled the coffers of the ruler who built it. But the message went even deeper than that. The very ability to construct such a massive, permanent, and expensive structure was a boast in itself. It screamed of vast resources, of a long-term vision, and of the stability to see a project through that might take decades to complete. In an era of shifting alliances and fleeting power, a stone bridge said, "We are here to stay." This messaging was carved into every available surface. Elaborate coats of arms were not mere decoration. They were a form of heraldic branding, asserting ownership and lineage for generations to come. Inscriptions, often in Latin, celebrated the patron who funded the construction, ensuring their name would be remembered long after they were gone. Some bridges, like the magnificent Pont Vaillantre in Cahors, France, featured intricate sculptures that blended the divine with the temporal. A statue of the Virgin Mary might stand watch over the span, offering spiritual protection while simultaneously implying that the ruler enjoyed heavenly favor for their earthly reign. This fusion of religious and political symbolism was a masterstroke of medieval propaganda. It suggested that to challenge the bridge's owner was not just a political act, but a sin against the divine order itself. These stone canvases spoke to different audiences in different ways. To a visiting diplomat or a rival noble, the bridge was a clear display of military and economic strength, a warning against any thoughts of aggression. For the local populace, it was a daily reminder of their place in the social hierarchy and a source of civic pride, a testament to the might of their city or lord. And for the countless travelers passing through, the bridge served as a brilliant, unforgettable advertisement for the power and sophistication of the realm they were entering. In a world without newspapers or mass media, the medieval bridge was a permanent, unignorable billboard, broadcasting a message of dominance that has endured for centuries, long after the kingdoms that built them have faded into history. But if those grand carvings were the boastful public face of the bridge, the true genius lay hidden within its very bones. Moving from the symbolism of power to the substance of its creation, we uncover a world of breathtaking innovation. The medieval bridge builder was a master of physics, a sculptor of stone who understood forces and loads in a way that feels almost intuitive to us today. They looked at a rushing, unpredictable river and saw not an obstacle, but a challenge to be outwitted with geometry and grit. They didn't have modern steel or concrete. Their tools were gravity, compression, and an intimate knowledge of the materials they pulled from the earth. One of their most brilliant moves was to borrow directly from the most ambitious buildings of their age, the great cathedrals. The same pointed arch that allowed Gothic cathedrals to soar to heavenly heights was adapted to span wide rivers. This wasn't just an aesthetic choice, it was a structural revolution. The pointed arch, compared to a rounded Roman arch, does something remarkable. It channels the immense weight of the bridge and anything on it more directly down into the supporting piers and down into the bedrock below. This meant the piers could be slimmer and more graceful, offering less resistance to the current during a flood, which was a critical survival feature. They further refined this with ribbed vaulting in multi-arched bridges, creating a skeleton of stone that was incredibly strong yet used material efficiently, saving both time and money. The choice of stone itself was a calculated decision that speaks to a deep, localized wisdom. Builders didn't just use whatever was available, they sought out specific types for specific jobs. For the foundations and piers constantly submerged in water, they might choose a dense, water-resistant granite. For the arches and decorative elements above, a softer, more workable limestone or sandstone could be finely carved. This wasn't just building, it was a form of geological tailoring, crafting a structure that was perfectly suited to its environment. The quarries were often opened right at the construction site, minimizing the nightmarish logistics of moving millions of tons of stone overland. Each block was painstakingly shaped by hand, its unique contours fitting into the whole like a three-dimensional puzzle, locked together with mortar whose recipe was a closely guarded secret of the Masons' Guild. And then there are the secrets, the features you wouldn't notice unless you knew where to look. Some bridges, like a select few guarding critical territories, were built with hidden defensive tricks. Imagine a central section that could be a drawbridge, its heavy wooden deck capable of being winched upward to create a gaping chasm, turning the bridge into a broken promise for any approaching army. Others incorporated murder holes in the gatehouses, openings through which defenders could pour boiling oil or rain down arrows on anyone who forced the main gate. More intriguing still are the rumored hidden chambers within the thick piers themselves. Were these simple storage rooms for toll collections or something more clandestine? Perhaps temporary holding cells, emergency shelters, or even secret passages leading to the riverbank for a quick escape. These hidden elements reveal a dual personality, the bridge as a welcoming public thoroughfare by day and a formidable, secretive fortress by night. This layer of engineering proves that these structures were not crude piles of rock. They were the carefully calculated products of some of the most brilliant and practical minds of the Middle Ages. Now, shift your perspective from the stone and mortar to the lifeblood that flowed across it. A medieval bridge was more than a symbol or a stronghold. It was an economic superhighway, a literal and figurative conduit for wealth that could make or break entire regions. Imagine the relentless flow of traffic, ox carts groaning under the weight of wool from English monasteries, spice-laden pack mules from Venetian galleys, and wagons piled high with German timber or Flemish cloth. Without a reliable bridge, these goods would be stalled at the river's edge, forced onto expensive and treacherous ferries, or left to rot while waiting for a shallow ford to become passable. A sturdy stone bridge eliminated that chaos, creating a predictable, all-weather crossing that supercharged commerce. It was the indispensable link in a chain of trade that stretched across continents, and everyone involved knew it. This strategic position made the bridge itself a phenomenal money-making machine. The right to collect tolls was a prize fought over by kings, bishops, and local barons. A merchant's purse was literally lighter after crossing, as toll collectors levied fees based on the type and quantity of goods. A herd of cattle pay per head. A cart of wine barrels pay per barrel. The records from the old bridge in Frankfurt show a dizzying array of tariffs on everything from sacks of grain to bundles of firewood. This revenue was the lifeblood of bridge maintenance, but it also filled the treasuries of those in power, funding everything from royal armies to lavish court festivals. The control of a major bridge could generate more consistent income than vast tracts of farmland, making it one of the most valuable assets in the medieval world. This economic energy didn't just stop at the toll booth. It spilled over and built a world on top of the bridge itself. The most famous example, London Bridge, wasn't just a crossing, it was a destination. For centuries, it was crammed with over 200 multi-story buildings, shops, homes, taverns, and even a chapel. Walking across was like navigating a narrow, bustling street, with merchants shouting their wares from wooden stalls and the smell of baking bread and roasting meat filling the air. It was a vertical, densely packed micro-city, a testament to the incredible value of every square foot of space directly on the trade route. This phenomenon wasn't unique to London. The Ponte Vecchio in Florence, the Charles Bridge in Prague, and countless others hosted permanent shops, creating vibrant commercial districts where the very act of crossing meant being surrounded by opportunity. Naturally, this concentration of wealth was a constant source of friction. Who had the right to these lucrative tolls? Was it the king who granted the charter, the local guild that funded repairs, or the religious order that claimed ancient privilege? These disputes could erupt into violent conflicts. Records from France describe armed skirmishes between the men of a local count and the agents of a monastery over control of a key bridge's toll income. The responsibility for maintenance was another bitter point of contention. A collapsed bridge meant economic disaster for everyone, but no one wanted to pay for its upkeep. This often led to complex legal arrangements where toll income was specifically earmarked for repairs, overseen by special bridge wardens who had to account for every penny spent. The bridge, in its silent stone permanence, became the focal point for all the ambitions, greed, and cooperations that defined the medieval economy, proving that the most important thing it carried wasn't people or goods, but money itself. But the flow of commerce and the display of power also made these bridges incredibly vulnerable and therefore incredibly valuable in times of war. This brings us to a far more aggressive layer of their identity, the medieval bridge as a military stronghold in disguise. We must completely shift our perspective. That beautiful arching span wasn't just a welcome sight for a merchant. To a military commander, it was a choke point to be seized, a barrier to be broken, or a fortress to be defended to the last man. In an era where controlling movement was the key to victory, the bridge was the ultimate prize on any battlefield. The most obvious sign of this martial purpose were the formidable gatehouses and towers that guarded the bridgeheads. These were not decorative arches, they were heavily fortified stone keeps built directly onto the bridge itself. Approaching soldiers would be faced with a narrow, exposed roadway leading to a towering gatehouse, its entrance protected by a heavy iron portcullis and thick oak doors reinforced with iron bands. Above them, the walls bristled with defensive features. Murder holes were cut into the ceiling of the gate passage openings through which defenders could pour down boiling water, hot sand, or quicklime onto anyone trying to break through the doors below. Arrow slits and later gun ports allowed archers and crossbowmen to fire on attackers with near impunity. The famous bridge at Avignon, the Pont Saint-Bénézet, originally had a massive fortified gatehouse at the Avignon side, controlling all access to the city and the papal territory beyond. It wasn't just a bridge, it was the front door to a fortress, and it was always locked and guarded. Some bridges took this concept even further, designed from the outset to be sacrificed. Known as bridge breaks or designed with booms, these structures had specific, weaker sections, often a central wooden span, that could be rapidly destroyed in the face of an advancing army. The defending force could collapse this section into the river, creating a wide, impassable gap that would halt an invasion in its tracks. This was a desperate but calculated tactic. Destroying your own infrastructure was a severe economic blow, but it was better than allowing an enemy army to pour into the heart of your lands. The beauty of this design was its reversibility. Once the threat had passed, the wooden deck could be rebuilt relatively quickly and cheaply, restoring the vital economic link. This shows a fascinating and pragmatic duality. The bridge as both a creator of wealth in peacetime and a destroyer of military momentum in war. Because of this immense strategic value, bridges became prime targets in any conflict. A successful siege often began not at the city walls, but at the bridge upstream or downstream that controlled reinforcements and supplies. To capture a bridge intact was a monumental tactical victory. To lose one was often a catastrophe. History is filled with examples of battles that turned on the control of a single stone crossing. The loss of a key bridge could isolate a castle, cut an army off from its supply lines, or open an undefended path directly into a kingdom's most fertile regions. They were the silent sentinels of medieval warfare, standing watch over the rivers that formed the natural boundaries of kingdoms. Their strength provided security, but their presence also painted a giant target on the landscape, ensuring they would be at the center of countless conflicts, their stones bearing the hidden scars of centuries of siege and battle. Yet for all their military and economic might, these stone giants also served a far more profound and intimate purpose in the medieval world. They were spiritual crossings, physical manifestations of a journey that was as much about faith as it was about geography. In an age where life itself was seen as a perilous pilgrimage toward salvation, a bridge became a powerful metaphor. It represented a safe passage over the treacherous waters of sin and doubt, a guided path from one state of being to another under the watchful eyes of heaven. This spiritual dimension was woven directly into the fabric of the bridges themselves, transforming a simple commute into an act of devotion. The most striking evidence of this is the integration of sacred architecture directly onto the bridge. It wasn't enough to just build a chapel near the crossing. Many bridges incorporated them into their very structure. The most famous example is the chapel of Saint Nicholas on the Pont Saint-Bénézet in Avignon, a beautiful Romanesque chapel that stood proudly on one of the bridge's piers. This was no afterthought. Pilgrims, after a long and dangerous journey, would stop here to give thanks for their safe arrival or to pray for protection on the next leg of their travels. These bridge chapels were sanctuaries in the truest sense, places of refuge high above the unpredictable river, offering both spiritual comfort and physical safety from the elements and from potential highwaymen lurking on the approaches. They served as a tangible reminder that every successful crossing was a small miracle, a gift from God that deserved acknowledgement. This connection to the divine was often rooted in miraculous origin stories. The Avignon Bridge itself is a perfect case study. According to legend, it was not an engineer or a king who conceived the idea, but a young shepherd boy named Bénézet. He claimed the Virgin Mary appeared to him and commanded him to build a bridge across the mighty Rhone River. When the skeptical bishop demanded proof, Bénézet miraculously lifted a massive stone into place, a feat far beyond the strength of any man. This divine endorsement spurred the entire community to contribute to the construction, turning the project from a civic duty into a holy act of faith. The bridge became a pilgrimage site in its own right, not just a path to one. Bénézet was eventually canonized, and his remains were interred in the bridge's chapel, making the structure itself a reliquary, its stones sanctified by his presence. This idea of sacred protection extended to every traveler. Before a long journey, especially one involving a river crossing, people would leave small offerings at a bridge shrine, a coin, a scrap of cloth, a hastily muttered prayer to buy the favor of the saint who watched over that place. The patron saint of bridges, Saint John of Nepomuc, is still depicted on countless European spans, his statue a familiar sight offering benediction to all who pass. This practice reveals a deep-seated anxiety. Rivers were powerful, dangerous, and capricious. A bridge was the only thing that offered safe passage. By sanctifying it, people were not just maintaining a piece of infrastructure, they were participating in a ritual that appeased the unknown and placed their trust in a higher power to keep the stones firm and the waters calm. The bridge, therefore, stood as the ultimate symbol of hope, a man-made structure that, through faith, became a divine promise of safe passage in a perilous world. Yet for all their divine protection and strategic importance, medieval bridges also cast long shadows in the popular imagination, becoming the fertile ground for some of the era's most enduring and chilling folklore. If the chapel on the bridge represented the hope of heaven, the tales whispered about its foundations often spoke of a far darker bargain. These stories were not mere entertainment. They were a crucial part of how medieval people made sense of the incredible, almost supernatural, achievement these structures represented. How could mere humans tame a raging river with stone? The answer, for many, lay in a deal with the devil himself. The most famous of these legends surrounds the many so-called devil's bridges scattered across Europe, with a particularly potent tale originating from the rugged landscapes of Wales. The story of the Pont y Ffynon Bridge is a classic Faustian bargain, According to the legend, an old woman desperately needed to get her cow across the turbulent river, but the villagers had failed for generations to build a span that could withstand the current. In her despair, she was approached by a mysterious, well-dressed stranger who offered a solution. He would build the bridge in a single night, but his price was the soul of the first living thing to cross it. Seeing no other choice, the woman agreed. As dawn broke, there stood a perfect, impossibly elegant bridge. The cunning stranger revealed himself as the devil, waiting to claim his payment. But the old woman was wiser than he knew. Instead of crossing herself or sending a person, she threw a crust of bread across the bridge, and her dog, chasing after it, became the first soul to claim the new path. The devil, cheated of a human soul by this simple trick, vanished in a cloud of sulphurous rage, leaving the bridge standing for the benefit of all. This story served multiple purposes. It explained the bridge's miraculous existence, it celebrated cleverness over brute force, and it embedded a clear moral warning about the hidden costs of ambition and the ever-present temptation of evil. Even more grim were the widespread rumors of foundation sacrifices, the belief that a bridge required a human life sealed within its structure to ensure its stability. This was not based on historical practice. There is no archaeological evidence for such a thing, but it speaks to a profound cultural anxiety. Building these massive structures was incredibly dangerous work. Accidents that claimed lives were tragically common. The folk belief likely arose as a way to rationalize these deaths, to give a terrible sense of purpose to a random tragedy. The spirit of the person who died, it was said, would become the guardian of the bridge, forever bound to ensure it did not fall. This gave rise to countless tales of ghostly bridge guardians. One common archetype was the spectral toll collector, a mournful figure who would appear to travelers on misty nights, not to ask for a coin, but to warn them of an impending collapse or to simply stand watch over the span he was forced to protect for eternity. These stories transformed the bridge from an inanimate object into a living entity with a memory, a conscience, and sometimes a terrible hunger. This rich tapestry of legend and superstition reveals that the medieval mind did not draw a firm line between the physical and the spiritual world. A bridge was a place of transition in every sense, not just from one bank to another, but between the safe, known world of the village and the unknown dangers of the wilderness beyond. It was a liminal space, a threshold where the normal rules of reality were thought to be thin, and where encounters with the supernatural were not just possible, but expected. The stories of devils and ghosts were a way to codify the very real fears of travel, disease, and structural failure. They served as communal cautionary tales, teaching lessons about honesty, cleverness, and the respect owed to both the natural world and the ambitious works of humankind. The stones of the bridge held the prayers of the faithful, but the shadows between them held the whispers of a much older, more primal world, ensuring that every crossing was undertaken with a sense of awe and perhaps a little bit of fear. Beyond the legends and the spiritual significance, the bridge served a far more immediate and human purpose. It was the central nervous system of a community, the ultimate social hub where the pulse of medieval life could be felt most strongly. Forget the quiet, isolated crossings we know today. A major medieval bridge was a relentless, chaotic, and vibrant public square suspended over water. It was a place where the line between travel and destination blurred completely, where you went not just to cross the river, but to connect with the world. The architecture itself forced this interaction. Narrow passages between buildings on bridges like London's created natural bottlenecks where people had to slow down, talk, and exchange goods and gossip. The gatehouses and towers weren't just for defense, they functioned as the town's primary information centers. From these high, commanding platforms, royal heralds would bellow out the latest proclamations, a declaration of war, a new tax, the birth of an heir to the throne. This was the medieval internet, and the bridge was its main server, ensuring news spread instantly to the largest possible crowd of travelers and locals alike. The bridge was also where you'd hear the more sensational, unofficial news, whispered rumors about a noble scandal, a merchant ship lost at sea, or the approach of the dreaded plague. In an age without mass media, this was how a community learned, debated, and formed its collective consciousness. This role as a civic stage extended into the administration of justice, often in its most brutal and public form. The bridge was a potent symbol of the law's reach, and authorities used its very public nature to make examples of those who defied them. The most infamous practice was the display of executed traitors' heads on spikes atop the gatehouses. For over 3 centuries, the southern gatehouse of Old London Bridge, known as Traitor's Gate, was gruesomely decorated with the impaled heads of those who had fallen from favor. The heads of famous figures like William Wallace and Thomas More were parboiled in salt and cumin to preserve them longer and warn all who entered the city of the ultimate price of rebellion. This was psychological theater on a grand scale, a constant, grisly reminder that the power of the state literally loomed over every entry and exit. But justice wasn't only about execution. Some bridges hosted actual courts or were the site of public punishments like the stocks, where petty criminals would be subjected to the ridicule and abuse of the very crowds passing by. The bridge ensured that justice and its aftermath was never a private affair, yet for all this darkness, the bridge was equally a place of immense joy and celebration. It was the natural focal point for public festivals, processions, and triumphs. Imagine a royal entry into a city. The bridge would be swept clean, hung with tapestries and garlands of flowers, and lined with cheering citizens as the monarch processed across. It was the first and most important stage of their welcome. During seasonal fairs, the bridge itself would become an extension of the marketplace, with jugglers, musicians, and actors performing for coins amidst the throng of shoppers. It was where lovers met in secret, where children played, and where deals that would shape local commerce were sealed with a handshake. The bridge held the full spectrum of human experience in its stones, the highest celebrations and the deepest betrayals, the birth of new ideas and the brutal end of lives. It wasn't just a structure people used, it was a living, breathing participant in the daily drama of existence, connecting souls just as surely as it connected shores. But the very public nature of these bridges, their role as stages for the drama of everyday life, also made them the perfect place to hide things in plain sight. This brings us to a more shadowy and intriguing layer, the existence of hidden passageways and clandestine features, proving that these structures often led a fascinating double life. While the common folk jostled and traded on the bridge's main deck, a very different kind of traffic might have been moving silently, secretly, just out of sight. For the powerful and the paranoid, a bridge wasn't just a connection. It was a potential escape route, a smuggling corridor, or a private observatory, all concealed within its seemingly solid stone form. The most famous and elegant example of this is the Vasari Corridor, the elevated, enclosed passageway that snakes its way above the shops of the Ponte Vecchio in Florence. Commissioned in 1565 by Cosimo de' Medici, the Grand Duke of Tuscany, this was the ultimate expression of power and privacy. The Medici family, though immensely wealthy and influential, were acutely aware of their vulnerability. The corridor, stretching nearly a kilometer from the Palazzo Vecchio, the seat of government, across the Ponte Vecchio, and over to the Palazzo Pitti, their private residence, allowed them to move between their home and their office without ever having to walk among the public. This wasn't just a convenience, it was a vital security measure. It shielded them from potential assassins, from the plague-ridden crowds during an outbreak, and from the simple, unpredictable moods of the Florentine populace, who had a history of rising up against their rulers. From its small, tinted windows, the Medici could look down upon the bustling commerce on their bridge, observing the life of their city without ever having to truly be a part of it, a powerful metaphor for the isolation that often comes with absolute power. Other bridges employed a different kind of secrecy, one that played out not above the waterline but just beneath it. Some medieval bridge designs incorporated what are known as submerged or drowning arches. These were lower, secondary arches built into the piers, designed to be completely underwater during periods of normal flow. To anyone standing on the bank or crossing the bridge, these features were invisible, simply part of the foundation. But their purpose was cunningly practical. During times of severe drought, when the river level dropped unusually low, these hidden arches could create a narrow, navigable channel. This allowed small, flat-bottomed boats to slip through the bridge unseen, bypassing the toll stations and guard posts on the main deck above. This feature was a smuggler's dream, perfect for moving contraband goods, whether it was untaxed wool, banned books, or forbidden weapons, directly through the heart of a city without any official notice. In times of war, these same hidden channels could allow for the covert movement of troops or supplies, turning a defensive barrier into a secret gateway for a surprise attack. This architectural deceit reveals a profound truth about the medieval world. In an era we often imagine as simple or straightforward, the reality was one of complex layers, both literal and figurative. A bridge, the most public and utilitarian of structures, could be honeycombed with private intentions. Its stones could tell two stories simultaneously, one for the masses who used its surface, and a far more secretive one for those with the knowledge and the privilege to access its hidden dimensions. These clandestine passages remind us that history is not always written in the grand carvings and obvious symbols. Sometimes it is hidden in the quiet, dark spaces between the stones, waiting for those who know to look a little closer. Now let's pull back another layer of stone and shadow to a place where medieval engineering meets pure psychological cunning. We've seen how bridges were fortified with towers and gates, but some of their most brilliant defenses weren't made of iron or stone. They were built from pure illusion. This was the art of architectural deception, a subtle form of psychological warfare designed to play tricks on the mind, to intimidate an approaching enemy, to confuse an invader, and to exalt the power of the Lord who commanded such cleverness. The builders of these spans were not just masons, they were masters of perception, using every trick of geometry and perspective to gain an upper hand before a single arrow was ever fired. Consider the approach to a fortified bridge from the territory of a potential enemy. The goal was to make the crossing appear as imposing and insurmountable as possible. One common technique was to use forced perspective in the design of the bridge's arches or its gatehouse. A bridge might be constructed so that the arches on the far side were slightly smaller or set at a different angle than those on the near side. To a traveler or a soldier viewing it from a distance, this created an optical illusion, making the entire structure seem steeper, taller, and more formidable than it actually was. It was a boast carved in stone, a deliberate exaggeration of strength meant to sow doubt in the mind of any hostile force considering an attack. Why assault a bridge that looks like it scrapes the heavens? This visual intimidation was a first and highly effective line of defense. This manipulation extended to the roadway itself with a feature known as a defensive curve or a bent axis design. Instead of running in a straight, predictable line from one bank to the other, the bridge would incorporate a deliberate, sharp kink or a gentle curve in its path. From a peaceful, economic standpoint, this might have helped the foundations align with more stable bedrock in the river, but from a military perspective, it was pure genius. Imagine you are a knight leading a charge across that bridge. You can see the gatehouse on the opposite bank, but the path to it is not direct. This curve completely broke the momentum of a cavalry charge or an infantry phalanx. It forced attackers to slow down, to bunch up, and to navigate a tight corner where they could be easily targeted from the flank by archers stationed on the bridge's towers or on the walls of the gatehouse. It turned a simple frontal assault into a chaotic, vulnerable, and murderous funnel. The subtlety of this psychological warfare didn't stop there. Even the act of crossing under a gatehouse was designed to be a disorienting experience. Many gatehouses were built as blind entries. You would pass through the first heavy portcullis into a small, enclosed courtyard. The inner portcullis leading to the actual bridge deck would be closed. For a moment, you were trapped in a stone pen, surrounded on all sides by high walls peppered with murder holes. This created a moment of intense vulnerability and psychological pressure, a final chance for the defenders to scrutinize you before granting access. For a merchant, it was a stressful delay. For an attacking soldier who had miraculously breached the outer gate, it was a death trap. Every aspect of the design was calculated to exert control, to dominate the will, and to demonstrate that from the moment you laid eyes on the bridge, you were playing by the builder's rules, moving through a landscape they had meticulously designed to confuse, intimidate, and ultimately to conquer. Behind every towering arch and every perfectly fitted stone stood not just a lone genius, but a highly organized and fiercely protective brotherhood of craftsmen. The master builders of the great medieval bridges were the rock stars of their era, but their fame was a collective achievement, channeled through powerful and secretive organizations known as the Masons' Guilds. These weren't mere labor unions or social clubs, they were the keepers of a sacred flame, the living libraries of architectural knowledge that made these monumental projects possible. To understand how a bridge like the one in Regensburg could stand for 8 centuries, you have to step inside the guarded lodge and learn the ways of the guild. The primary function of these guilds was to protect a body of knowledge that was literally the difference between a lasting monument and a pile of rubble in the river. In a world without engineering textbooks or standardized universities, the guild was the sole repository of hard-won expertise. This knowledge was passed down through a strict system of apprenticeship, from a young, unskilled boy who would mix mortar and carry tools for 7 long years, to a journeyman who would travel from worksite to worksite honing his craft, and finally, if he proved exceptionally talented and loyal, to the exalted rank of master. The secrets he learned were treated like state secrets. The perfect recipe for mortar, for instance, was not just sand, water, and lime. It often included mysterious additives, eggshells, animal blood, even certain types of volcanic ash that were believed to grant supernatural strength and durability. The precise geometry for calculating the thrust of an arch, the method for determining the best foundation points in a shifting riverbed, the art of dressing stone with nothing but a hammer and chisel to create a seamless fit, these were not written down. They were transmitted orally from master to apprentice on a need-to-know basis, ensuring that the power of construction remained firmly in the hands of the initiated. This control created a professional monopoly that was both a blessing and a curse for medieval society. On one hand, it guaranteed a remarkably high standard of quality. A master mason's reputation, and by extension his entire guild's, was staked on every project. A collapsed bridge was not just a tragedy, it was a professional disgrace that could bankrupt a guild and blacklist its members for life. This powerful incentive for excellence is a key reason why so many medieval structures are still standing today. On the other hand, this monopoly bred intense rivalries and could stifle innovation. Guilds guarded their territorial rights with ferocious legal battles and sometimes even physical violence. A guild from Cologne might be hired to build a bridge, deliberately snubbing the local guild from a neighboring town, leading to decades of bitter feuding. These rivalries could delay projects for years and drive costs through the roof, as competing masters underbid each other or sabotaged one another's work. The construction of a major bridge was as much a political and economic chess game as it was an engineering challenge. Perhaps the most tantalizing legacy of these guilds are the mysterious marks they left behind. If you look closely at the stones of the Steinerne Brücke in Regensburg, or on the piers of countless other medieval structures, you'll find them, small, carefully chiseled symbols. A compass, a set of dividers, a unique geometric pattern, or a stylized letter. These are not random graffiti, they are the signatures of the master masons and their journeymen. Each craftsman had his own unique mark, which he would carve into every stone he personally shaped and dressed. This was a system of quality control and accountability. The warden of the worksite could look at a stone, see the mark, and know exactly who was responsible for its craftsmanship. If a stone failed or was poorly cut, the man whose mark was on it would be held accountable, often facing a stiff fine deducted from his wages. But these marks were more than just signatures. They were a silent language of pride and identity. They were a way for these otherwise anonymous artists to say, "I was here. My hands made this." Some theorists even suggest that complex assemblages of marks might have served as encoded instructions for assembly, a sort of Stone Age IKEA manual meant only for the eyes of other guild members. These cryptic symbols are the closest we can get to a handshake across the centuries from the unsung heroes whose skill and secrecy literally built the foundations of the modern world. Yet for all their symbolic grandeur and engineering brilliance, a medieval bridge was a constant, losing battle against the relentless forces of nature and time. The triumphant moment of its completion was merely the starting gun for a never-ending marathon of maintenance, a desperate and expensive struggle to hold back the water, ice, and decay that ceaselessly conspired to return the stone to the river. This 11th layer reveals a humbling truth. The true test of a society's commitment wasn't in the glorious act of building, but in the gritty, unglamorous, and perpetual duty of preservation. A bridge was a living entity, and it demanded a constant sacrifice of treasure and toil just to keep it standing. The primary antagonists in this struggle were the very elements the bridge was built to conquer. Every winter, freezing temperatures turned the river's spray into a deadly weapon. Water would seep into the smallest cracks in the masonry, freeze, and expand with incredible force, silently prizing stones apart from within. Spring brought the terrifying power of floodwaters, which could scour away the vital rubble and timber foundations protecting the piers, undermining their stability. The constant flow of the river itself acted like liquid sandpaper, slowly but surely wearing down the stone. And then there was the human element, the relentless vibration from heavy cart traffic, and the occasional direct strike from a ship that had lost its way in the current. A bridge was under siege every single day, and its defenders were the often overlooked army of masons, carpenters, and laborers whose names are lost to history. Funding this eternal repair campaign was a logistical and political nightmare that sparked endless innovation and conflict. The most common solution was the toll, but this was far from simple. The right to collect tolls was a prized franchise, often granted by the king to a town, a monastery, or a private individual in exchange for a lump sum or a share of the revenue. This created a complex web of responsibility. The toll income was supposed to be ring-fenced for maintenance, but it was always a temptation for corruption or for being diverted to other, more immediately pressing civic expenses. When a crisis hit, like a war or a famine, bridge repair was often the first thing to be postponed, with catastrophic consequences. We see this tragically in the year 1281, when the original timber London Bridge, weakened by years of neglect and a particularly harsh winter, collapsed under the weight of a massive crowd gathered to watch a tournament. Chroniclers of the time reported that hundreds of people were drowned or crushed in the disaster, a grim testament to the human cost of deferred maintenance. When tolls and taxes failed, communities turned to more creative and sometimes desperate measures. This is where we encounter one of the most poignant figures of the medieval landscape, the bridge hermit. These were not recluses seeking solitude in the wilderness. A bridge hermit was an officially appointed, often religious, figure who was granted permission to live in a small stone cell built into the bridge's structure. Their job was to act as a living, breathing collection box. From their tiny window, they would beg alms from every passerby, reminding them of their Christian duty to charity and of the very practical need to keep the bridge from collapsing beneath their feet. The hermit was a constant physical manifestation of the bridge's fragility and the shared responsibility everyone had for its upkeep. In some cases, wealthy patrons would leave large bequests in their wills specifically for bridge repair, hoping to buy a measure of divine favor and eternal gratitude by funding a few more years of the structure's life. This endless scrabble for funds reveals the fragile economics behind these stone giants. They were monuments not just to ambition, but to a fragile, ongoing pact between human society and the raw, untamable power of the natural world. But the very control that made bridges so valuable to kings and lords also made them a glaring target for those who felt the crushing weight of that authority. If a bridge was a symbol of power, then to the oppressed, it became a symbol of everything that was wrong with the system, a stone and mortar representation of the taxes, the laws, and the armies that kept them in their place. This 12th layer uncovers a fiery chapter in the life of these structures, when they transformed from instruments of control into the very stages for revolution. In times of popular uprising, a bridge was no longer just a crossing. It was a barricade to be stormed, a record office to be purged, and a potent symbol to be captured or destroyed. The logic behind targeting a bridge during a revolt was brutally simple and strategically brilliant. For a ruling authority, a bridge was a vital logistical artery. It allowed them to quickly move troops, messengers, and supplies to trouble spots, to reinforce garrisons, and to surround and crush rebellions before they could spread. For the rebels, seizing or disabling that bridge was the equivalent of cutting the main power line to the state's security apparatus. It could isolate the seat of power, often a castle or a walled city, from its supporting territories and from any loyalist armies stationed elsewhere. A single well-placed barricade on a key bridge could trap a king's forces on the wrong side of a river, giving a rebel army precious time to consolidate its gains, rally more supporters, and bring its demands directly to the terrified elite cowering behind the city walls. The physical act of taking a bridge was also immensely powerful theater. It demonstrated that the people had literally broken the chains of their oppressors and now controlled the very pathways of power. We see this play out with explosive clarity during the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 in England. This wasn't a minor riot, it was a massive, organized insurrection that swept across the country, fueled by outrage over a new poll tax and deep-seated frustrations with the feudal system. The rebels' ultimate goal was London, the heart of royal power, and the key to taking London was its bridge. As thousands of rebels from Kent and Essex converged on the city, the London Bridge became the crucial choke point. The story goes that the city's leaders, in a panic, actually began to raise the drawbridge to block the rebels' entry, but they were thwarted by a stunning act of solidarity from within. The common people of London itself, who shared the rebels' grievances, rose up and forced the bridge to be lowered, swinging open the gates to the army of revolt. This moment perfectly illustrates the bridge's dual nature, a defensive tool for the powerful that instantly became a weapon for the people when their will was united. Once across, the rebels knew exactly what to target. They didn't just wander the streets, they carried out a deliberate and symbolic campaign of destruction aimed at the instruments of their oppression. And high on their list was the toll house and record office on London Bridge. They stormed it and threw the hated tax records and property deeds into the Thames, watching the parchment that legally bound them to a life of servitude dissolve in the water or be consumed by flames. This was more than vandalism. It was an attempt to erase the very paperwork of their subjugation, to destroy the memory of their debts and obligations. By burning the records on the bridge, they were making a profound statement. They were reclaiming this symbol of economic control and using it as a pyre for the old order. For a few brief, electrifying days, the bridge that had for so long been a tool for extracting wealth from the people became the platform for their declaration of economic independence. These moments reveal the ultimate paradox of the medieval bridge. Its strength made it a pillar of the establishment, but its vital importance also made it the most vulnerable point in that system's defenses, waiting for the day when the people decided they had had enough. Yet for all their seeming permanence, for all the centuries of prayer, commerce, and conflict they witnessed, the fate of many medieval bridges was not to stand forever, but to vanish. The 13th layer we uncover is one of absence, a silent testament to the impermanence that awaits even the most mighty of human creations. These lost bridges, swept away by war, nature, or the relentless march of progress, form a ghostly network of memories buried just beneath our modern world, their stories waiting to be rediscovered one stone at a time. The causes of their disappearance are a chronicle of medieval and modern calamities. During times of war, a strategic bridge was often a casualty of scorched earth tactics. Armies on the retreat would not hesitate to sabotage a vital crossing to slow their pursuers, using fire, picks, and even early gunpowder to collapse archers and render the span useless. Nature, however, was an even more relentless and impartial destroyer. The Great Flood of 1481 on the River Rhone, for instance, is legendary for its destructive power, washing away entire towns and claiming multiple bridges in its torrent, including several of the original 22 arches of the Pont Saint-Bénézet at Avignon. These events were seen as acts of God, humbling reminders that human engineering, for all its brilliance, was ultimately powerless against the full, furious might of a river in flood. But perhaps the most common cause of loss has been simple neglect. The immense, ongoing cost of maintenance we discussed earlier meant that when a major repair was needed, it was sometimes deemed more economical to simply abandon the crossing, letting the elements finish the job over decades of decay, or to replace the stone marvel with a cheaper, more modern wooden structure. The most famous example of a bridge meeting its end not by disaster but by deliberate replacement is the original London Bridge. After serving the city for over 600 years, the medieval bridge, that fantastical street of buildings suspended over the Thames, was simply no longer fit for purpose by the early 19th century. Its narrow, dark arches acted as a dam, slowing the river's flow and creating a dangerous frozen waterfall in the winter that threatened the foundations of the buildings on it. The decision was made to dismantle it, a painstaking process that began in 1831. But here, the story takes a fascinating turn. The bridge's stones did not simply vanish into landfill. In a remarkable act of recycling, much of the granite was sold and shipped to the United States, where it was used to build the foundations of a massive new manor house on a plantation in Maine. Later, in the 1960s, the developer Robert McCulloch purchased the remaining facing stones, shipped them across the Atlantic again, and had them meticulously reassembled in the middle of the Arizona desert at Lake Havasu City, where a version of London Bridge still stands today as a bizarre and surreal tourist attraction, a medieval ghost haunting an unlikely modern landscape. Other lost bridges have taken a different path to oblivion, not by traveling across oceans, but by sinking into the earth. As cities grew and modernized, many medieval bridges were simply buried. Rivers were canalized, their banks reinforced and built up, and old bridges were deemed too low, too narrow, or too weak for modern traffic. Rather than demolish them, engineers often made the pragmatic choice to simply pave over them, entombing the ancient stonework beneath new streets and squares. This is why, in cities across Europe like Paris, Prague, and York, medieval bridge foundations are occasionally rediscovered during routine construction work for a new subway line or sewer pipe. Archaeologists suddenly find themselves brushing mud from centuries-old masonry, revealing the ghostly outline of a forgotten crossing right in the heart of the modern urban bustle. These moments are like a crack in time, offering a fleeting glimpse of the city's older, slower heartbeat. These absences are more than just historical footnotes, they are profound reminders. A lost bridge forces us to confront the fragility of our own legacy. We build skyscrapers that seem to defy the clouds and engineer networks that connect the globe in an instant. Yet the fate of these stone giants whispers that all things, given enough time, will be reclaimed. A bridge that took generations to build, that defined the economy and defense of a region for centuries, can be gone in a single storm or by a single vote of a city council. They teach us that history is not a straight, unbroken line, but a river that frequently changes its course, leaving behind the silt and stone of forgotten worlds. Each lost bridge is a monument to the relentless passage of time, a silent echo of the footsteps that will never again cross its span. But if we look even closer, past the grand arches and into the very fabric of the stone itself, we discover that these bridges are perhaps the most honest historians of all. They are literal time capsules, not in the sense of a sealed box buried for the future, but as a magnificent, sprawling patchwork of recycled history. Every block of stone, every batch of mortar, tells a story of conquest, adaptation, and the human urge to build anew upon the bones of the past. To construct a medieval bridge was an act of immense ambition, and builders were nothing if not pragmatic. They used what was at hand, and often, what was at hand were the ruins of a fallen empire. Across Europe, the ghost of Rome provided the raw materials for the medieval world. The crumbling walls, abandoned villas, and derelict temples of the empire were vast, convenient, and high-quality quarries for any aspiring bridge builder. It's a deeply symbolic act. The new Christian kingdoms, defining themselves against the pagan past, were literally building their foundations with the physical remnants of that past. In cities like London, Paris, and Regensburg, the foundations of medieval bridges are packed with distinctive square Roman bricks and finely cut stones robbed from nearby ruins. A traveler crossing such a bridge was literally passing over history, walking on the repurposed legacy of a civilization that had itself mastered bridge building centuries before. This reuse wasn't just practical, it was a quiet, continuous thread connecting two vastly different eras, a physical manifestation of the phrase, standing on the shoulders of giants. This practice of embedding history went far beyond simple stone recycling. It often took on a powerful spiritual and superstitious dimension. The most famous example is the Charles Bridge in Prague, begun in 1357. According to legend, its builders, seeking to ensure the bridge's divine protection and structural permanence, mixed eggs into the mortar. While that quirky recipe might be more folktale than fact, a far more profound ingredient was added: holy relics. Chronicles tell us that crushed saints' bones, fragments of the true cross, and other sacred fragments were blended into the mortar used to bind the stones. This transformed the entire structure from a mere engineering project into a colossal, unconsecrated reliquary. The bridge wasn't just stabilized by physics, it was sanctified by faith. Every stone was held in place, in a sense, by the spiritual power of martyrs and saints, making the act of crossing it a form of pilgrimage in miniature, a journey across hallowed ground. This idea of the bridge as a collective memory, a mosaic of different times and purposes, extends to the very marks left upon it. Look at the stones of an old bridge, and you might see more than just masons' marks. You might find fragments of carved decoration, a piece of a Roman frieze depicting a pagan god, a section of a tombstone with a half-eroded Latin inscription, or a worn-down medieval gargoyle that once adorned a cathedral that fell to fire or war. These are called spolia, the recycled fragments of older art and architecture. Their inclusion was sometimes a simple lack of options, but often it was a deliberate political statement. For a new ruler, embedding the artwork of a defeated dynasty or a conquered people into the foundation of your new bridge was the ultimate act of dominance. It symbolized that their culture was now literally beneath your feet, subsumed into your own grand project, their history broken up to serve your future. Each bridge, therefore, becomes a chaotic, beautiful, and often conflicted archive. Its stones are pages from 1,000 different books, bound together into a single, enduring narrative of human ambition, telling a story not of a single time, but of all the times that came before it. Yet to see a medieval bridge as merely a means to cross water is to miss its deepest language, for its very shape speaks in the silent poetry of sacred geometry. The arch, that sublime curve that defies gravity, was far more than an engineering solution. It was a profound symbol, a stone prayer reaching for the heavens. In a world where the divine was believed to infuse every aspect of creation, the builders of these spans were not just constructing a roadway, they were inscribing a spiritual ideal into the landscape itself, creating a structure that physically and metaphorically connected the earthly with the celestial. This symbolic power is most vividly expressed in the Gothic bridges that began to rise in the High Middle Ages, built in the same era and often by the very same guilds of masons who were constructing the great cathedrals. They shared a common architectural vocabulary, and the most striking of these shared features was the pointed arch. While we've already explored how the pointed arch efficiently channels weight downward for structural stability, its meaning reached much higher. In cathedral design, these soaring arches were intended to draw the eyes and the spirit of the worshipper upward toward the light of heaven, creating a sense of awe and transcendence. On a bridge, the effect was strikingly similar. To walk through a series of these graceful, reaching arches was to experience a miniature pilgrimage, a rhythmic passage through a man-made canyon of stone that mirrored the nave of a church. The journey across the water became a symbolic ascent, a physical act that echoed the soul's desired journey toward salvation. The bridge, in this light, was not just a convenience for the body, but a guide for the spirit. The symbolism was often meticulously coded into the very blueprint of the bridge through the deliberate number of arches built. This wasn't a random or purely practical decision. Numbers held immense symbolic weight in medieval thought, and the choice was a deliberate act of weaving meaning into the structure. A bridge with 12 arches, for instance, might silently honor the 12 apostles, the foundational pillars of the Christian faith, suggesting that anyone crossing was under their collective protection and guidance. A bridge with 7 arches could invoke the 7 cardinal virtues: faith, hope, charity, fortitude, justice, prudence, and temperance, implying that a virtuous life was itself a safe bridge over the turbulent waters of sin and temptation. Even a single, mighty arch could be seen as a representation of the unity of God or the singularity of divine truth. This numerical language turned the entire structure into a kind of silent sermon, a mathematical hymn that could be read by the learned and felt by everyone else, reinforcing the religious worldview with every crossing. This fusion of form, function, and faith transformed the bridge from a utilitarian project into a chapter of sacred geometry written in stone. It was architecture as theology, where the principles of mathematics and physics were employed in the service of a higher purpose. The careful proportions, the harmonious repetition of arches, and the sheer balance of the structure reflected a medieval belief in a universe ordered by divine reason, a cosmos built on perfect, intelligible principles. By building in this way, the creators were aligning their work with the fundamental order of creation itself. A well-built bridge was therefore not just strong, it was morally and spiritually right. It stood as a testament to a world where the physical and the spiritual were inseparable, where every stone laid was an act of devotion, and where crossing a river could feel, if only for a moment, like walking through the doorway to a higher realm. Yet for all their divine symbolism and their role in the grand narratives of power and faith, medieval bridges also provided the stage for the most intimate and human of dramas, the affairs of the heart. This 16th layer reveals a profound duality, where the very stones that witnessed the march of armies and the flow of commerce also absorbed the whispered vows of lovers and the echoes of devastating heartbreak. A bridge suspended between two worlds became the perfect metaphor for love itself, a connection forged over treacherous depths, a daring leap of faith, and sometimes a journey with a tragic end. In the shadow of its arches, the full spectrum of human passion played out, leaving behind a legacy of legend and sorrow that still clings to these structures today. The very design of these bridges cultivated an atmosphere of romance and secrecy. Consider the enclosed, lantern-lit passageway of the Ponte Coperto in Pavia, or the hidden alcoves beneath the arches of the Charles Bridge. These were not the open, brightly lit causeways of today. They were places of shadow and seclusion, offering a rare sliver of privacy in a crowded, communal world. For young lovers kept apart by social class or feuding families, a bridge at night became a secret sanctuary. Its constant murmur of flowing water could mask whispered conversations, and its multiple access points allowed for a quick escape should their meeting be discovered. The bridge was a neutral ground, a place outside the strict confines of the home and the prying eyes of the community, where a stolen moment could feel like an eternity. This tradition transformed the bridge from a simple monument into a living participant in countless untold love stories, its stones the only confidants to promises made under the stars. But where there is the ecstasy of love, its shadowed tragic despair is never far behind. The same features that made a bridge a perfect rendezvous also made it a tragically potent site for a final, desperate act. The most famous legend of this kind, though from a later period, encapsulates this dark allure, the story of the Ponte dell'Accademia in Venice and the two lovers who leaped to their deaths. While the specific tale is likely a romanticized fiction, it endures because it resonates with a universal truth. The bridge's height offered a guaranteed end, and the water below promised a dramatic, almost theatrical finality. To choose such a public yet isolating place for a private tragedy speaks to a desire to make a profound, unignorable statement of anguish. Their story, and others like it, cemented the bridge's role not just as a crossing, but as a threshold between life and death, a place where the ultimate emotional stakes were played out. This association between bridges and profound emotion ensured their place as powerful symbols in art and literature long after the Middle Ages ended. Chaucer's pilgrims in the Canterbury Tales cross countless bridges on their journey, each crossing representing not just a physical but a moral and social transition. In Shakespeare's works, bridges and rivers are often the backdrop for pivotal, emotional moments, secret meetings, betrayals, and battles. This artistic legacy exploded in the Romantic era of the 18th and 19th centuries. Poets like William Wordsworth saw in the ruined arches of a medieval bridge not just decay, but the sublime beauty of a passionate, tragic past. The bridge became a muse for artists and writers obsessed with intense feeling, nature's power, and the haunting presence of history. This potent blend of love, loss, and dramatic setting continues to captivate the modern imagination. The tradition of attaching love locks to the railings of bridges from Paris to Prague is a direct, if unofficial, continuation of this ancient symbolic link. Couples inscribe their names on a lock, fasten it to the bridge, and throw the key into the water below, symbolically locking their love forever to that liminal space, making it as permanent as the stone itself. Filmmakers instinctively use bridges for climactic romantic scenes, the passionate reunion, the heartbreaking farewell, the moment of decision high above the water. This enduring power proves that the medieval bridge's greatest strength may not be in its arches, but in its unique ability to mirror the human heart, a structure built to connect, capable of bearing immense weight, yet forever poised over an abyss of deep and unknowable emotion. Yet we must also consider the river itself, that powerful, living entity the bridge sought to tame. The construction of a massive stone pier in the middle of a waterway was an act of profound intervention. It altered the river's very character, changing flow patterns, sediment deposition, and even the temperature of the water. The riverbed upstream of a bridge would often silt up as the current was slowed by the obstruction, while downstream, the scouring action of the diverted water could deepen the channel dramatically. These weren't just minor changes, they could render old fords useless, flood previously safe riverbanks, or starve downstream mills of the water power they depended on. The bridge, in its quest to create a stable point of connection, inevitably made the river around it less stable, forcing communities into a perpetual dance of adaptation with the newly engineered environment they had created. This manipulation of water flow was not always a negative side effect. Often, it was the entire point. This brings us to one of the most ingenious and industrious adaptations, the mill bridge. This was a hybrid structure that combined the function of a crossing with the power of industry. Builders would incorporate a water mill directly into the bridge's structure, using the force of the river current funneled between the piers to turn a massive water wheel. The Ponte Vecchio in Florence, though famous for its shops, originally hosted butchers who used the river flowing beneath to dispose of waste, but other bridges across Europe were true powerhouses. The remains of the mill bridge at Pont de l'Arche in France show how the bridge itself was designed as a dam, carefully calibrated to maximize the hydraulic energy that could be captured to grind grain, full cloth, or operate the hammers of an early forge. This transformed the bridge from a passive structure into an active engine of production, a central component in the nascent industrial revolution that began in the Middle Ages, proving that its utility extended far beyond mere transportation. However, this very efficiency at harnessing the river's power placed the bridge at the center of fierce social and economic conflict. The most common flashpoint was the fish weir. Many bridges were built with intricate wooden frameworks or nets attached to their piers, designed to catch fish as they swam through the bridge's narrower channels. For the bridge's owner, this was a brilliant double dip: collect a toll from people crossing and harvest a bounty from the river below. But for merchants and fishermen who made their living further downstream, these weirs were a disaster. They could block the migratory paths of salmon and eel, decimating fish stocks for miles and destroying the livelihoods of entire communities. The historical records are filled with lawsuits, violent protests, and even acts of sabotage against these bridge-based fishing operations. In 1293, angry fishermen in London were fined for tearing out the weirs on London Bridge, a direct action against what they saw as an unfair monopoly that was starving them out. These conflicts represent some of the earliest documented environmental disputes, pitting economic benefit against ecological sustainability and the rights of one group against another, all centered on the unintended consequences of a single magnificent structure. In this way, the medieval bridge stands as a profound and early example of humanity's complex relationship with the natural world. It was not a passive addition to the landscape. It was an active rearranger of ecosystems, a creator of new energy, and a focal point for resource conflict. Long before the industrial age, these stone giants were teaching a difficult lesson: that every major act of engineering, no matter how brilliant, creates a cascade of consequences, both intended and unforeseen. The bridge builders sought to conquer the river, but in doing so, they were forced to become its managers, its partners, and sometimes its adversaries, learning to navigate the delicate balance between human ambition and the enduring power of the natural world. But the power of a bridge extended far beyond controlling the flow of goods and people. It could also define the very edges of a kingdom itself. In the fractured political landscape of medieval Europe, a river was often the most clearly defined and defensible natural border between rival powers. The bridge that spanned that river, therefore, became something far more significant than a connection. It was a highly fortified and meticulously monitored front door, a physical manifestation of the border itself. To cross from one bank to the other was to leave one world and enter another, a transition marked by customs officials, armed guards, and a complete change in the rules that governed daily life. The most dramatic examples of this were the great bridges spanning the Rhine River, which for centuries formed the volatile frontier between the Holy Roman Empire and the Kingdom of France, and between countless smaller, quarrelsome principalities within the empire itself. A bridge like the one at Cologne or Mainz wasn't just a local crossing. It was a strategic international asset of immense diplomatic importance. Control of such a bridge could dictate the terms of trade and the movement of armies for an entire region. Its ownership was frequently contested, and treaties often included specific clauses governing rights of access and toll collection. The bridge tower on the far side was less a gatehouse and more an embassy and a military checkpoint rolled into one, staffed by soldiers whose loyalty was to a distant duke or bishop, not to the city the bridge physically attached to. A dispute over tolls or a refusal of passage to a nobleman's retinue could escalate from a minor incident into a diplomatic crisis that required the intervention of the emperor or the pope to resolve. For the average person, approaching this border crossing was an experience fraught with anxiety and procedure. Before even setting foot on the bridge, travelers would be funneled into a customs house on their own side of the river. Here, officials would meticulously inspect their goods, scrutinize their travel documents, which could be a letter from a local abbot or a lord granting them safe passage, and calculate the various tolls and tariffs due. The complexity of medieval law meant that crossing the bridge could mean stepping into an entirely different legal realm. The laws of inheritance, the penalties for crimes, the rights of peasants, and even the weights and measures used in the market could change dramatically from one bank to the other. A person considered a freeman on one side might find themselves liable for a feudal tax on the other. This made the bridge a place of legal as well as physical transition, where your identity and your rights were reassessed and redefined by the authorities waiting on the far shore. This system of control was so ingrained that it created a unique and often uncomfortable social space right on the bridge itself. The span between the two gatehouses became a kind of limbo, a neutral ground that was technically part of neither territory. It was here that handovers of prisoners might take place, where merchants from rival states could meet to negotiate in a space free from the immediate jurisdiction of either ruler, and where spies could exchange information, shielded from the full reach of the law on either bank. The bridge, in its role as a border, didn't just separate worlds. It created a third, transient world in between, a narrow stone isle of diplomacy, intrigue, and uncertainty. It was the medieval world's most tangible lesson in the artificiality of political borders, a place where the line on a map was made terrifyingly and often expensively real. Now let's listen for a moment, not to the rumble of carts or the chatter of merchants, but to the bridges themselves. For some of these stone giants were not just feats of visual engineering, they were unintended instruments designed by the wind and water that flowed around them to create their own otherworldly music. This 19th layer reveals a hidden dimension of medieval craftsmanship, where the laws of physics and a touch of serendipity conspired to turn functional structures into ethereal composers, conducting stone symphonies that echoed across the rivers they spanned. The builders may have been focused on strength and stability, but in achieving it, they accidentally unlocked a magical acoustic secret. The primary musician in this ensemble was the wind itself. When a steady breeze flows across a broad, flat parapet or whistles through the narrow gaps between sculpted balusters, it can produce a low, haunting hum, not unlike the sound you hear blowing across the top of an empty glass bottle, but magnified 1,000-fold. This phenomenon, known as aeolian resonance, turns the entire bridge into a massive wind instrument. The specific pitch and tone were determined by the bridge's unique geometry, the thickness of the railings, the spacing of the stones, the shape of the decorative cutouts. A bridge could literally sing its own signature note, a deep, droning bass that would have been a constant, subconscious backdrop to life in a medieval town, a sound so ingrained that people might only notice it in its absence. On a foggy morning, with the town still asleep, that mournful hum would be the only sound, making the bridge feel like a living, breathing entity. But the most breathtaking acoustic feat was almost certainly intentional, a stunning fusion of spiritual purpose and architectural genius. The evidence for this is found in the ancient Stari Most, the iconic old bridge of Mostar in Bosnia and Herzegovina, originally built in the 16th century. While its famous arch is a later Ottoman construction, its design philosophy is a direct heir to the medieval tradition. The bridge's magnificent single span was not just an engineering marvel, it was a giant stone amplifier. The unique curvature of the arch and the specific way its stones were fitted acted as a perfect parabolic reflector for sound. When the muezzin gave the call to prayer from the mosque minaret on one side of the river, the bridge's architecture would catch and focus those sacred notes, projecting them with astonishing clarity and volume across the entire Neretva River valley and into the homes nestled on the opposite bank. This wasn't an accident, it was acoustic engineering on a monumental scale, ensuring that the faithful on both sides of the river were united in worship, their community connected not just by stone but by shared sound. The bridge became an essential tool of devotion, its very form bending to serve a higher calling. This marriage of sound and structure wasn't limited to grand spiritual gestures. The more common multi-arched bridges created their own rhythmic water music. The flow of the river, forced through the narrow channels between the stout piers, would create complex currents, swirls, and eddies. Water rushing around a submerged rock or slapping against the curved underside of an arch produces a variety of sounds: a gentle gurgle, a percussive slap, a deep, swirling glug. In a bridge with many arches, these individual watery notes combined into a constant, ever-changing liquid percussion section. The sound would change with the seasons: a quiet trickle during a summer drought, a powerful, roaring bass during the spring snowmelt. For those living or working on the bridge, this aquatic soundtrack was the pulse of the passing days and the mood of the river itself, an audible gauge of the environment state. The bridge, therefore, did not silence the river. It collaborated with it, composing a unique piece of music every minute of every day, a performance heard by all but composed by the unseen hand of physics and the thoughtful design of long-forgotten builders. But the influence of these stone marvels wasn't confined to the physical landscape. It spilled over into the very art and identity of the age, captured in thread, pigment, and polished shield. Beyond their roles in commerce and war, medieval bridges ascended into the realm of pure symbol, becoming powerful icons of unity, stability, and enlightened rule in the artistic and heraldic language of the time. A lord didn't just build a bridge to move goods. He commissioned a tapestry depicting one to broadcast a message of peace and prosperity. A rising family didn't just control a crossing. They emblazoned a bridge on their coat of arms to declare themselves the indispensable link holding the community together. This migration from stone to symbol marks the bridge's ultimate cultural triumph, proving its power had become so profound that it could be abstracted and still command respect and authority. Nowhere is this symbolic power more elegantly displayed than in the intricate world of heraldry, the complex visual language of medieval nobility. Coats of arms were not mere decoration. They were a form of branding, a legal document in visual form that declared a family's history, their lands, and their most valued virtues. To include a bridge in this sacred space was to make a very specific claim about one's role in the world. The most famous example is the coat of arms of the Medici family, the famed bankers and de facto rulers of Renaissance Florence. Their emblem featured a series of red balls on a golden field, but it was the bridge that often served as the foundation, both literally and symbolically. For the Medici, the bridge was a perfect metaphor for their political strategy. They positioned themselves as the essential connection between the powerful factions of the city, the old nobility, the wealthy merchants, the guilds, and the common people. Their crest declared, "We are the structure upon which this city's stability is built. Without us, the connection fails and chaos ensues." It was a brilliant piece of political propaganda, transforming a family of financiers into the indispensable architects of civic unity. This symbolic language extended far beyond a single family. In the tapestries that adorned the cold stone walls of castles and great halls, bridges frequently appeared as backdrops to scenes of courtly love, royal processions, or mythological tales. In the magnificent The Hunt of the Unicorn tapestries, a delicate bridge often arches over a stream in the background of those enchanted forests. Its presence is not accidental. In these narratives, the bridge represents a transition from the ordinary world into the realm of the magical and miraculous, a threshold the hero must cross to begin their transformative journey. Similarly, in illuminated manuscripts, the borders and illustrations depicting biblical stories often used a bridge to symbolize the journey of the soul or the connection between the earthly and the divine. An image of pilgrims crossing a bridge on their way to a holy site was a direct visual metaphor for the soul's perilous journey toward salvation, with the bridge itself representing the church's guiding role in providing a safe path. These artistic depictions did more than just record what a bridge looked like. They cemented its cultural meaning for centuries to come. By repeatedly associating the bridge with ideals of safe passage, stable rule, and spiritual transition, artists and heralds wove it into the very fabric of European thought. It became a visual shorthand for connection itself, an instantly recognizable symbol that anyone, from an illiterate peasant to a learned scholar, could understand. A bridge on a tapestry wasn't just a bridge, it was a promise of order. A bridge on a shield wasn't just a geographic feature, it was a vow of protection and unity. This elevation into art ensured that the bridge's legacy would endure long after any single stone structure had crumbled, its form forever frozen in threads and pigments, continuing to tell its story of connection in the silent, powerful language of symbol. Yet in their darkest hours, these same structures of stone and commerce revealed a profoundly different purpose, transforming from engines of economy into sanctuaries of last resort. When plague swept through a medieval city, its very geography of fear was redrawn, and the bridge, with its unique position suspended between worlds and bathed in open air, became a desperate refuge. The crowded, stinking, pestilent streets of the urban center were seen as a death trap, the disease believed to fester in the stagnant, confined air. In this terrifying calculus, the bridge offered a sliver of hope. Its exposure to the constant river breezes was thought to act as a natural purifier, scouring away the miasma, the foul, corrupt air believed to carry the sickness. This belief wasn't just superstition, it was a practical observation born of desperation. Authorities, with few other options, began to utilize the bridge's unique architecture as a tool of crisis management, creating impromptu quarantine stations or moving essential markets out onto its span. The very structure built to connect communities was now being used to carefully separate the sick from the well, the potentially contaminated from the vulnerable, all in a frantic attempt to control the uncontrollable. This role as a place of isolation and safety extended beyond the immediate terror of the plague. Many of the great stone bridges incorporated more permanent structures of charity directly into their fabric. Built into the massive gatehouses or nestled between the shops on the bridge deck, you might find a small almshouse or a hospital. These were not hospitals in our modern sense, but rather shelters for the poor, the elderly, or the infirm, those who had fallen through the cracks of feudal society. The bridge was a logical, if poignant, location for such charity. It was a very public place, ensuring that the act of giving was visible to all, reinforcing the Christian duty of alms giving for the wealthy merchants who passed through. But it also placed society's most vulnerable literally at the crossroads of the community, a constant, quiet reminder of the fragility of life and the obligation of the fortunate to care for the less so. The low, constant murmur of the river below and the endless procession of life across the deck provided a strange sort of companionship for those with nowhere else to go, making the bridge not just a shelter from the elements, but a refuge from the crushing loneliness of poverty. This transformation reveals the medieval bridge's ultimate communal paradox. It was a tool of exclusion, capable of slamming its gates shut against armies and raising its drawbridge against threats. Yet it was also a place of incredible inclusion. In times of peace, it welcomed all who could pay the toll. In times of festival, it hosted the entire community in celebration. And in times of utter despair, during the waves of Black Death that periodically erased entire families, it offered its cold, hard stones as a final bastion of clean air and a sliver of hope against the darkness. It became a stage for the entire human experience, from the highest expressions of power and art to the most basic, gut-wrenching struggle for survival. The bridge held everyone from the king in his procession to the beggar seeking a coin, from the healthy merchant to the plague-ridden soul taking their last breath in the open air. In its role as a refuge, the bridge demonstrated that its true strength was not found in its defiance of gravity, but in its capacity to bear the weight of human suffering, offering a steadfast, stone-solid shoulder for the community to lean on when the world itself seemed to be crumbling. But behind every king's boastful inscription and every saint's protective statue stood the true architects of these marvels, the countless anonymous hands whose names were never carved into the stone. We celebrate the patrons who funded these projects and sometimes the master masons who led them, but history has largely erased the vast armies of labor that actually did the back-breaking, dangerous work of turning grand designs into reality. These forgotten builders were a diverse and often forced workforce, peasants fulfilling their feudal labor obligations to their lord, prisoners given a grim choice between hard labor and a darker fate, and skilled craftsmen drawn from far-flung corners of the world, bringing techniques that would revolutionize construction. Their collective story challenges the romantic myth of the solitary genius and forces us to see these bridges not as the product of a single brilliant mind, but as a colossal, collaborative effort, often built on a foundation of coercion and sweat. Perhaps the most striking example of this erased expertise comes from the great reconstruction projects in Spain during the 12th century, a period known as the Reconquista. As Christian kingdoms pushed south, reclaiming territory from Muslim rulers, they encountered a landscape of ruined Roman infrastructure and rivers in desperate need of reliable crossings. The local Christian building traditions had stagnated, but the knowledge preserved and advanced in the Islamic world was centuries ahead. So, in a fascinating paradox of holy war and practical necessity, Christian kings began hiring the very Muslim engineers their wars were meant to displace. These master builders from Al-Andalus arrived with a deep understanding of geometry, hydrology, and advanced stone-cutting techniques that seemed like magic to their new employers. They introduced the use of pointed arches and sophisticated foundation methods that could withstand powerful currents, fundamentally changing the course of European bridge design. Yet, on the bridges they helped create, you will not find their names. Their legacy is not in inscriptions, but in the silent, enduring language of the stone itself, a revolution in engineering hidden in plain sight, credited only to the Christian kings who paid for it. This erasure extends down to the lowest levels of the construction chain. The quarries that provided the millions of tons of stone were scenes of unimaginable toil. Peasants bound by the manorial system would have been compelled to contribute a certain number of days each year to this corvée labor. This was not a paid job, it was a tax paid with their bodies. Using primitive picks, wedges, and hammers, they would pry massive blocks from the earth, their work accompanied by the constant, deafening ring of iron on stone. The danger was ever present. Rockfalls, shattered limbs, and lung diseases from breathing stone dust were simply part of the cost of construction. Once cut, these monstrous blocks, often weighing several tons, had to be moved. Without modern machinery, this was a logistical nightmare solved by sheer human and animal power. They were loaded onto wooden sledges and dragged by teams of oxen along roads turned to mud, or floated down river on precarious barges, a journey where a single mistake could mean the loss of months of work and the lives of those transporting it. At the construction site itself, the workforce was a chaotic, bustling hierarchy. At the bottom were the common laborers and prisoners, who mixed the vast quantities of mortar in great pits, hauled the stones into position with ropes and pulleys, and worked the massive treadwheel cranes, walking endlessly inside a giant wooden wheel like human hamsters to lift materials to the rising deck. Theirs was a world of mud, noise, and constant peril, working on shaky scaffolding high above rushing water. Above them were the skilled journeymen masons who precisely shaped the stones according to the templates provided by the master mason. And at the top was the master himself, the architect-engineer who held the secret plans, constantly checking alignments with simple but effective tools like plumb bobs and water levels. This entire ecosystem, from the quarry to the peak of the arch, was a symphony of coordinated effort, but history only recorded the name of the conductor. The thousands of musicians who actually made the music have faded into silence, their greatest monument being the bridge that still stands, a testament to their anonymous collective genius. Yet even in an age defined by feudal strife and near-constant warfare, the bridge could occasionally shed its martial identity to serve a far more fragile and noble purpose, that of a peacemaker. Amidst the countless spans built for conquest and control, a handful were conceived from their very foundation as instruments of truce, their stones mortared not with ambition, but with a desperate hope for reconciliation. These rare bridges of peace stand as powerful exceptions to the rule, testaments to moments when rival factions looked across a river of blood and saw not a barrier, but a potential handshake frozen in stone. The most compelling historical example emerges from the fractured landscape of 14th century Italy, where city-states like Florence and Milan were locked in a perpetual struggle for dominance. In 1392, a temporary truce was brokered between the warring powers, and as part of the delicate agreement, a bridge was designated as the official meeting point for negotiations. This was no random choice. The bridge was selected precisely because it existed in a state of legal and political ambiguity. It was technically part of both territories and yet sovereign to neither. Its deck became a literal no man's land, a thin strip of neutral ground suspended between two worlds at war. This neutrality was absolutely crucial. For diplomats and ambassadors to meet, they needed a space where neither side could be accused of submitting to the other by traveling into their rival's territory. The bridge provided that perfect, symbolic equilibrium. To step onto it was to voluntarily leave your own domain and enter a shared space of temporary and fragile parity, a physical manifestation of the diplomatic middle ground both sides were trying to find. The architecture of these meetings was itself a form of theater designed to ease tensions and foster accord. The negotiations would often be held in a specially constructed wooden pavilion, erected right in the center of the bridge's span, ensuring that both parties had to travel an equal distance to reach the table. The table itself might be positioned so that its center line matched the exact political border running down the middle of the bridge, a subtle but powerful reminder of the balance required for talks to succeed. Every detail, from the seating arrangements to the placement of guards, was meticulously negotiated beforehand to prevent any perceived slight or advantage. This ritualized setting was not mere pageantry, it was a psychological tool. By creating a space that was equally inconvenient and equally accessible to both sides, the bridge forced a level of humility and mutual dependence. The murmuring river below served as a constant reminder of what was at stake, a natural force that cared nothing for their petty squabbles and would continue to flow long after their kingdoms had turned to dust. In a world where violence was often the first and last resort of political discourse, these bridges offered a rare alternative. They became the chosen ground for the incredibly delicate work of hostage exchange, where prisoners of war or high-value captives would be walked to the midpoint of the span and handed over to their compatriots, a transaction conducted with the water flowing beneath, symbolically washing away the old enmity. They were the sites where treaties were literally signed on portable desks, The documents then read aloud to the assembled soldiers and representatives from both sides, their words carried away by the same wind that fluttered the banners of both armies. For a few hours, the sounds of clashing steel were replaced by the scratching of quills and the low murmur of reasoned debate. The bridge, so often a catalyst for conflict, was temporarily repurposed as its antidote, a platform where the complex, frustrating, and vital work of peace could begin, offering a glimpse of a world where connection was not a strategic advantage to be weaponized, but a common good to be cherished. While the physical bridges of the medieval world carried the weight of carts and commerce, their literary counterparts were tasked with bearing a far heavier burden, the weight of the human soul. Authors of the era, from the creators of soaring epics to the writers of earthy vernacular tales, instinctively reached for the bridge as the ultimate metaphor for life's most perilous and pivotal transitions. Its very architecture, a solid, man-made path suspended over a chaotic, natural abyss, made it the perfect setting for a character's moment of choice, a test of faith, or a terrifying journey into the unknown. In the pages of medieval literature, a bridge was never just a bridge. It was a crossroads of destiny, a narrow span between who a character was and who they were about to become. We see this symbolic power deployed with breathtaking complexity in Dante Alighieri's Inferno, written in the early 14th century. As the poet Virgil guides Dante through the concentric circles of hell, their journey is fraught with treacherous crossings. The bridges here are perverse inversions of their earthly counterparts. In the sixth circle, for instance, they must cross a deep chasm to enter the city of Dis, and later they navigate a series of rocky ridges spanning the Male Bulge, the 10 ditches of the eighth circle. These are not structures built to provide safe passage. They are part of the architecture of divine punishment, forcing the damned below to witness the poet's progress and exposing the travelers to the horrors they traverse. To cross one of Dante's infernal bridges is to pass a point of no return, to descend deeper into an understanding of sin and its consequences. The bridge becomes a terrifying symbol of spiritual descent, a deliberate step away from grace and into a deeper knowledge of despair, its stability offering no comfort, only a clearer view of the suffering below. In stark contrast, Geoffrey Chaucer, writing later in the same century, uses the bridge in a far more earthly, yet equally profound way in the Canterbury Tales. His band of pilgrims is constantly crossing and recrossing the River Thames on their journey from London to Canterbury. These physical crossings, at places like Deptford Bridge or Greenwich, are mundane events, but they act as rhythmic punctuation marks in the narrative. The bridge is a place of congregation and dispersal, where the group comes together to negotiate the crossing, only to potentially break apart into new conversational pairings on the other side. It's on these spans and their approaches that the social hierarchy of the group is both enforced and subtly challenged. The knight might ride across with dignity, while the miller's rough cart clatters noisily behind him. The bridge doesn't just connect two banks of a river, it connects the tales to the tellers, the pilgrimage to the place, and the individual to the collective. It represents the very journey of life itself, a social, messy, sometimes contentious, but ultimately shared movement toward a hoped-for destination. Beyond these two giants, the bridge appears throughout medieval literature as a site of trial and transformation. In the countless romances and chivalric tales that were the popular fiction of the day, a lonely bridge often serves as the setting for a critical challenge. A knight-errant seeking to prove his worth will inevitably find his path blocked by a narrow bridge guarded by a fearsome opponent, a monstrous troll, a rival knight, or a supernatural guardian. This is the bridge as trial trope. To cross is not a simple act of travel, it is a ritual of passage. The knight must defeat the guardian, often by knocking them into the churning water below, in order to prove his virtue, strength, and right to proceed on his quest. The bridge here is a threshold guardian, a physical manifestation of the obstacles that must be overcome for the hero to advance, to win his lady, or to reclaim his honor. Its narrowness forces a one-on-one confrontation, stripping away all distractions and reducing the hero's journey to a single, defining moment of combat on a stone stage above an abyss. This rich literary tradition cemented the bridge's place in the Western imagination as something deeply symbolic. Its dual nature, offering a path to salvation or a road to ruin, a moment of communal gathering or a point of isolated trial, perfectly captured the anxieties and aspirations of the medieval mind. Life was a precarious journey, and the bridge became its most powerful shorthand, a symbol that every listener or reader could instantly understand. It taught that every crossing held consequence, that progress required courage, and that the path from one state of being to another was often narrow, dangerous, and watched by forces both seen and unseen. Long after the medieval period ended, authors would continue to draw on this deep well of meaning, using the bridge to represent everything from psychological transitions to social divides, proving that the metaphor carved in stone and inked on parchment was perhaps the most enduring construction of all. Yet the echo of their genius is far from a distant memory confined to history books and museum pieces. It lives on vibrantly and practically in the very bones of our modern world. The principles painstakingly perfected on those medieval river crossings became the foundational blueprint for the infrastructure that defines our contemporary landscape. The next time you drive across a soaring highway, overpass, or speed through a railway tunnel, you are, in a very real sense, experiencing the direct legacy of those master masons who first dared to conquer gravity with stone. Their brilliant adaptation of the arch remains one of the most enduring and efficient structural forms in human history, its basic physics unchanged even as our materials have evolved from hand-chiseled limestone to reinforced concrete and gleaming steel. The visual language of strength and stability they codified is still employed by engineers today, who understand that a beautifully proportioned structure is very often an inherently sound one, marrying aesthetic grace with unshakable function, just as their medieval predecessors did. This legacy extends far beyond mere shape and into the very economic models that fund our modern travel networks. The medieval toll booth, once a wooden shed manned by a collector armed with a ledger, is the direct ancestor of the electronic toll collection systems that now whisk traffic across bridges and through tunnels without the need to even slow down. The complex feudal agreements over who was responsible for maintenance, a source of constant negotiation and conflict, evolved into the public-private partnerships and municipal bonds that finance the massive infrastructure projects of today. The fundamental problem they solved, how to pay for a vital public good that benefits everyone but is prohibitively expensive to build and maintain, is the same one we grapple with now, and their solutions, however ancient, form the historical bedrock of our own. The medieval mind, in its pragmatic ingenuity, effectively invented the economic framework for modern public works, proving that their innovation was not limited to physics but extended into the realms of finance and social organization. Perhaps the most powerful testament to this enduring value is the immense effort and expense modern societies undertake to preserve or even rebuild these ancient structures. Following the near-total destruction of the historic city of Dresden in World War II, one of the most passionate and symbolic reconstruction projects was not a palace or a church, but the city's magnificent 18th-century Baroque bridge, the Augustusbrücke. While not strictly medieval, its design and spirit are a direct continuation of that tradition. Its meticulous rebuilding in the late 20th century, using original plans and traditional methods where possible, was a profound statement. It declared that the bridge was not a disposable piece of infrastructure but an irreplaceable part of the city's soul, a tangible link to a past that the war had tried to erase. This act of preservation is repeated across Europe, from the ongoing careful restoration of the Ponte Vecchio's foundations to the painstaking stabilization of the ruins of the Avignon Bridge. We preserve them not just for their beauty, but for their continuing power to teach us. They are open-air classrooms for engineering students, case studies in durability for architects, and sources of inspiration for artists and city planners seeking to create new spaces that feel as grounded and human-centered as these ancient spans. Ultimately, the modern legacy of the medieval bridge is a lesson in holistic thinking, a masterclass in building for the centuries rather than just for the next fiscal quarter. Today's engineers, armed with computer models and advanced materials, are now returning to these ancient principles, not out of nostalgia, but out of a hard-nosed recognition of their superior sustainability and resilience. The arch distributes weight so efficiently that it uses far less material than a blunt beam-style support, a crucial consideration in an age concerned with carbon footprints and resource conservation. The use of local stone, a necessity for the medieval builder, is now a celebrated tenet of green architecture, reducing transportation emissions and harmonizing structures with their natural surroundings. The medieval bridge was inherently sustainable, built from the landscape itself and designed to become a part of the ecosystem, hosting shops and homes and communities in a beautifully efficient multi-use design that today's urban planners strive to emulate. In looking back to these ancient crossings, we are not retreating into the past. We are rediscovering a profoundly intelligent way to build a future that is durable, beautiful, and deeply connected to the human experience, proving that the best path forward often lies in understanding the wisdom of the roads we've already traveled. And so we arrive at the final and perhaps most tantalizing layer of all. For all our knowledge, for all our archaeology and historical research, these ancient stone giants have not given up all their secrets. They remain, in many ways, the strong, silent types of the historical world, holding their cards close to their chest. Just when we think we have them figured out, a new discovery, a strange architectural quirk, or a puzzling piece of folklore emerges to remind us that some mysteries are still cemented deep within the mortar, waiting for the right key to turn. This isn't a failure of our understanding, but rather the bridge's final gift to us, a perpetual invitation to wonder, to question, and to keep exploring. Consider the legendary Pont d'Avignon, the ruins of which we've mentioned before. Visitors today see a fractured span ending abruptly in the middle of the Rhône, a poignant relic of the bridge's former glory. But hidden within the thick, surviving piers are small, empty chambers, their original purpose now lost to time. Were they simple storage lockers for the toll collector's records and coins, a secure vault protected by tons of stone? That seems a practical, logical explanation, but others propose a more intriguing possibility. Could these cramped, dark spaces have been oubliettes' forgotten cells for holding prisoners briefly before they were moved? Or perhaps even for isolating the sick during an outbreak, using the river's flow to carry away foul air? The truth is, we simply don't know. The chambers offer no inscriptions, no artifacts, no definitive clues. They are blank pages in the bridge's story, and their silence fuels endless debate among historians, each theory a different key trying to unlock the same stubborn door. Then there are the silent messages carved into the stone, a codex without a cipher. Across Europe, bridges are adorned with carvings that defy easy explanation. A bizarre, grinning face on a keystone that seems to serve no structural purpose. a series of intricate, interlocking rings on a parapet that look less like decoration and more like a diagram. A worn-down sculpture of an animal that doesn't belong to the local fauna. Are these merely the whimsical flourishes of a bored stone carver, exercising a little creative freedom on a long project? Or do they hold a deeper, symbolic meaning, a protective sigil to ward off evil spirits, a maker's mark for a guild that wanted more than a simple geometric signature, or perhaps even a clever political cartoon aimed at a contemporary figure, the joke now lost to centuries of weathering and changing context? Without a written record from the carver themselves, we are left to interpret the artist's intent, making each strange carving a Rorschach test for the modern mind, reflecting our own desires to find patterns and meaning in the ambiguous. This dance between the practical and the symbolic is at the heart of the greatest unresolved debates. Take the recurring myth of the foundation sacrifice, the dark legend that a human being was walled into the bridge's foundation to ensure its stability. As we discussed, there is absolutely no archaeological evidence to support this as an actual practice, but the persistence of the story across countless cultures and bridges is in itself a fascinating historical puzzle. Was it simply a macabre way for pre-scientific societies to explain the very real and frequent construction accidents that claimed lives? Or did it serve a deeper social function, a terrifying folktale used to keep children away from the dangerous construction site, or a grim narrative that reinforced the immense cost and sacred importance of the project, making the community value and care for the finished structure all the more? The mystery isn't whether it happened, but why the story was so powerful and so universal. The answer lies not in the dirt under the piers, but in the shared psychology of the people who told the tale. This is the enduring magic of these structures. They are not static museum pieces. They are active archaeological sites, their secrets slowly yielding to new technologies like ground-penetrating radar and 3D laser scanning. Every time a drought lowers a river level to reveal previously hidden foundation stones, or a restoration project peels back a later addition to expose the original medieval work, we are given a new clue. The debate over a strange carving or a hidden chamber isn't a sign of academic failure. It is the sound of history still being written, the evidence still being weighed. It means the conversation between the past and the present is still very much alive, conducted in the language of stone and speculation. The bridges, in their quiet, immutable way, continue to ask the questions, leaving it to each new generation to try and divine the answers. Medieval bridges were the silent witnesses to history, carrying not just people but the dreams, conflicts, and ingenuity of an entire era. They stood at the profound intersection of art and engineering, faith and raw power, secrecy and public spectacle. Every stone in their construction tells a story far grander than simple passage from one bank to another. These structures were the convergence point for entire worlds, the solemn pilgrim and the ambitious merchant, the marching army and the fleeing rebel, the whispered secret and the shouted proclamation. They were built to last, not just against the relentless flow of water, but against the tumultuous currents of human affairs, absorbing the echoes of countless footsteps into their very fabric. As we walk across their modern descendants, the sleek steel overpasses and concrete causeways of our time, it's worth pausing to consider the immense legacy beneath our feet. That simple act of crossing a river, which we now take for granted, was once one of humanity's most daring and complex achievements. Each stone in an ancient bridge is a page in a vast, unfolding story of who we are. It speaks of the anonymous mason who carved it, the ruler who taxed for it, the trader whose livelihood depended on it, and the lover who met their fate upon it. These layers of meaning are buried in plain sight, a testament to a time when building something was an act of faith in the future, a declaration that the community would endure and that connection was worth any cost. So the next time you find yourself crossing a bridge, any bridge, take a moment, feel the history. Think of the 26 layers we've journeyed through today, from the symbols of power carved in stone to the secret passages hidden within it, from the economic engines they powered to the spiritual journeys they guided. These structures remind us that our world is built, quite literally, on foundations of incredible ingenuity, profound belief, and countless untold stories. They challenge us to look deeper, to see the extraordinary meaning in the ordinary landscapes of our lives. What's the most fascinating bridge legend from your part of the world? Share your stories and discoveries in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. And if you enjoyed this journey into the past, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next adventure.